Good day. My name is Michael Mulondo, and I'm going to discuss the subject of HIV Studies 2 for the higher certificate level. And the purpose of this presentation is to give you some guidelines that can help you to prepare for your assignment and then also submit your assignment. And this assignment, there are 4 assignments that you have to complete for the subject. And I'm going to discuss each assignment in detail, which can help you then to prepare and then, of course, in time submit for your assignments. So I will quickly go through the 4 assignments. The first assignment is you have to look at the governance, and when you do this, you have to explain what is governance. I will then ask you to make a reference to look at your study guide or your study manual, to look at the 8 characteristics or the characteristics of governance. Then the second thing what you're going to look is you're going to identify an organization or a ministry that is doing that are working in the field of HIV/AIDS. When you are going to identify an organization, you will name the name of the organization and what they're doing, and then you are going to look at the different aspects of governance. Now, I'm going to explain in detail the 8 characteristics and what you need to do when you are going to look at it. So for the organization, you're going to discuss each characteristic of governance within that organization or the ministry that's working in the field of HIV/AIDS. Then secondly is you are going to discuss the challenges they are facing. What problems do they have with regard to these governance principles or characteristics. Then thirdly is then you're going to discuss the successes this organization or ministry has achieved with regard to the governance characteristics or principles. Then secondly, the second assignment is you're going to look at OVCs, and at the OVCs you're going to look at orphans and vulnerable children. That's assignment number 2. What is the aspect of OVCs in Namibia? Why is orphans and vulnerable children, the issues of orphans and vulnerable children that are affected by HIV/AIDS, very important. So you're going to discuss in detail. You're going to look at the impact HIV/AIDS is having on these children. You are going to look at the consequences that is having, and then also you're going to look at what the government is doing, what plan of action is in place, or what action plan is in place to address the issue of OVCs in Namibia or with regard to HIV/AIDS. Now, the third assignment is you're going to look at proposal writing, and in this proposal you're going to explain what is proposal writing. Then in your assignment you are expected then to write an actual proposal where you will look the reason for this proposal is to get funding for your HIV program, and then you are then going to look at how does the current funding landscape look in Namibia. Is there still funding available for HIV programs in Namibia, or is there no funding? And what is being done, for an example, when it comes to HIV funding? And then, of course, you can give some statistical evidence with practical example when it comes to this funding in Namibia. And it's very important for you to know and to understand that when you have this funding in place, why it is very important. So even in your assignment, if you can just explain the importance of proposal writing, why do you need proposal writing, and how do you apply proposal, how effective is proposal or project proposal when it comes to HIV funding. And then you can look the issue of funding in Namibia, and you can compare funding, HIV funding, with other African countries, or let's take SADC, Southern African countries. You compare Namibia, the funding of HIV funding of Namibia, Botswana, South Africa, Swaziland, Zambia. You can look at those countries, Angola, and you can come up with a comparative analysis. You can give some statistics and why do you think HIV funding is good or it's bad in Namibia. So those are some. Assignment number 4 is you're going to explain and you're going to look at the issue of gender-based violence. So you're going to define and explain what is gender-based violence, what is the situation of gender-based violence in Namibia, and how does it affect the country. You're going to explain, you're going to give practical example, you're going to give details, and then if you discover this, it is a problem in Namibia, then you are going to give some recommendation. What do you think do we need to do to address gender-based violence? And for every answer that you give, you have to justify with practical example. So if you take scenarios, you can take newspaper clips, you can take articles, you can take whatever resources, make reference to an incident that happened, why did it happen, what is your solution to that. This is the discussion you need to bring out in your assignment. Give details, give facts. Facts. It's very important that your assignment needs to be factual when it comes to the issue of gender-based violence, and you need to give current statistics, current issues when it comes to gender-based violence. So those are the 4 assignments that you have to do. So I'm going to go now into details of the 4 assignments. So I'm going to start with assignment number 1. Now, the issue of governance is very important. Now, governance has got a very broad definition, and people that are working in corporate governance or governance issues will tell you about the King's Report. They will tell you about the ethical principle when it comes to governance. Now, I will make a reference to your study guide, your manuals. These are what I call the 8 elements of good governance. You can also say the characteristics of governance. Now, there are 4 things that you have to do for this assignment. The first thing is you identify the organization or the ministry that's working in the field of HIV/AIDS, and you give the name. You tell, very small, 2 paragraph, 1 paragraph, what is this, or who is this organization, what are they doing in the field of HIV, and then secondly, then you discuss, do they have any governance pillars, governance foundation, what governance aspects or governance elements is involved. Then number 3 is you're going to discuss the successes. So you take each characteristic or element of governance, then you say, for example, you say rule of law in organization X is good, or it's not existing, why? So which means it's a failure. And then after you discuss the success or the failure, then number 4 is you have to give the recommendation. Name the organization, identify the elements of governance in that organization. Number 3, you look at the successes, the failure. Number 4, you come up with a remedial action or your recommendation with regard to that specific element. Remember, there's 8 elements. For every element you discuss, you identified whether it's existing in the organization, whether it's successful or whether it's a failure. What is your recommendation? Very, very important. And you have to give practical example. Don't just copy from the internet and give it in your assignment. You have to give factual information, factual proof. And of course, whenever you use any sources they have to make references to the source. You need to use APA referencing, very important. So I'm quickly going to go through the 8 elements of good governance, and I'm going to explain it as it is in your study guide or study manual. The first one is the rule of law. Now, it's very important that every organization needs to adhere to the legal framework or the legal instruments of the country. The law of Namibia or for any country is very important. And every registered organization or entity needs to adhere to the laws of the countries. So here you have to look at, does this organization use any legal framework or legal instruments? What legal instruments do they use? Do they have any body that regulates this organization? What are the bodies? Do they have a board of governance that's adhering and reinforcing the law? Or do they don't have? And if they don't have, what is it? So you have to discuss this in detail. Identify those legal framework within the organization. The second element is you have to look at transparency. Information within the organization. How open is this organization towards the public? How open is this organization open towards its own employees? So that's what we call transparency. I always explain to my students the different, what is transparency. And when I use transparency, I always use the example of the difference about a mirror and a glass or a window. So the difference between a mirror and a window is, in a mirror, whatever you see in a mirror, it reflects. So you can't see through a mirror, it's a reflection. But when you look at the window, you can look through the window because the window is open, it's transparent. So any organization needs to have that window principles or window framework of transparency, which can help. So these are some of the things that you can look. You come up with example, and then you explain about the whole issue of transparency. The third aspect that you have to look at, which is the third element of good governance, is responsiveness. When the organization is working, because any organization are having different stakeholders. And when I talk about stakeholders, I'm talking about stakeholders within the organization, which is its employees, stakeholders outside the organization, which are the board of directors, which are the investors, so co-owners, co-directors. So when it comes to the organization or the ministry, how do they relate to the different organizations or to the different stakeholders? And this is very important. And this is where what we call communication, information sharing is coming. And what is, when this organization is sharing information, or this organization is sharing information, as I say, what is the reasonable time frame? What is the feedback time frame, for example? When information is needed, does the organization respond in time? So this is the whole aspect of responsiveness. Then number 4 is the consensus orientation, where that when an organization makes a decision, it needs to keep its stakeholders in mind. Stakeholders within the employees, and then also other stakeholders. And the consensus means that everyone, whatever decision is made by the organization, consensus has to be taken, which means everyone in the organization must agree to it. So agreement is very important, and if everyone in the organization agrees, it makes it much easier for this organization to adhere to the good governance. So then the fourth element is equity and inclusiveness. So everyone in the organization are equal. So how equal when it comes to gender? And is everyone included when it comes to decision making? Or does the organization make decision only at the senior management level? Nobody is involved. So these are some of the aspects you have to look. Effectiveness and efficiency. How effective is the organization? Does the organization meet the needs of its stakeholders, of its client, of its employee? This is what you have to look at. Accountability. Is the organization accountable towards its employees? Because remember, there is a difference between responsibility and accountability. Responsibility is you take care of that which you are entrusted to. Accountability is you give account to those that are above you. So that's very important, that you have to know those differences. So the organization is accountable towards its stakeholders, towards the public, especially when it comes to public-related organization. Participation, when the organization makes decision or whatever they do, is everyone, does it participate, both men and women, or is it only involving men or only women? So these are the 8 elements, and as I explained to you earlier, when you are going to do this assignment 1, you identify the organization, you look at the 8 elements, you discuss the successes, the failure as per elements of the governance, then you give your recommendation per elements or principle of governance, which is very important for any organization as much as possible. So then we go to the second assignment. The second assignment is looking at orphans and vulnerable children, OVC. How is orphans and vulnerable children affected? Now, there are different aspects that I want to talk about, but at this stage, what I'm going to share is just a guideline, but you, as a student, when you are going to submit your assignment, of course, you can look at different aspects. Now, orphans and vulnerable children are most of the time stigmatized because of their status. They are isolated, they are discriminated. Most of them don't have family, and if they are family, then they are disinherited by the family or extended family. So there are so many challenges that orphans and... Now, in your assignment, you have to bring out those challenges that orphans and vulnerables are facing. The issue of guardians, who's taking care of them? The issues of abuse by the guardians, the issues of neglect by foster parents, you have to bring out those aspects. What are the rights of orphans and vulnerable children in Namibia? And then, of course, which is very important, is when orphan, which means an orphan means someone that doesn't have a father, the mother and father that does not have any guardian at all, or any parents. Now, is there a provision for a will for this child? Who's writing out the will? And this is where it's very important that families need to be informed already, to have a testament, as they call, or a will, so that in case both parents passed away, that at least the children will inherit. So it's very important in your assignment, you have to bring out this aspect. Then, of course, grant qualification, often grants that they are getting from government, how important is it? And then also, of course, many foster parents, or many people volunteer when it comes to orphans and vulnerable children. So it's very important that you have to explain that in detail, and you have to bring that out in your assignment as much as possible. So that's with regard to orphans and vulnerable children. So keep that. As I said, this is the purpose of this presentation is the guideline. It's to help you, to assist you, for you to submit your assignment in time and what is expected. Now, the third assignment is looking at funding. Now, it would be very good in your assignment if you can start off with the whole current situation of HIV funding in Namibia. How does it look like? How many Namibian dollars, how many US dollars, how many foreign currency is being pumped in Namibia, for example, when it comes to HIV funding? Do organizations benefit from this funding? How do they benefit? What is the sustainability when it comes to this organization? Now, in the light where situation where funding is very limited, most organizations are required to write a funding proposal, or to write proposal in order to get funding. Now, I'm quickly going to just show you or explain to you what is needed within a proposal, which is very important. But at the end of the day, it's what you actually going to give up. And as I say, you can bring a comparative analysis of HIV funding of Namibia compared to other African countries, whether it's Zambia, Botswana, South Africa, Swaziland, any SADC country, Angola, and you can bring up. Now, if you are going to, or when you're going to write a proposal, there are different aspects that you have to look at. Now, a proposal is divided in different components or the different areas. The first one is the title. The proposal or the title is very important because the title will capture the reader. And remember, proposal is it's writing. It's there to get money, and you are giving this paper or this document to someone that you believe will give you money for your projects or for what you want to do. So the title plays a very important role, and you have to make sure that whenever you write a title, it needs to be smart, to the point, short and sweet, to the point. So when it whoever reads it, it captures their mind. And most organizations make the most mistake where they write a very long sentence just to explain the title. So it's very important for you to just have a very short sentence when it comes to the title. The second component is the summary page, where you look and you discuss what will be the project about, where will the project be implemented, who will implement the project, who will benefit from the project, how will you implement the project, when are you going to implement the project. So this is in a summary page where you explain in detail. And the content page, it's also elaborate, where you go more into details. You give the objective, you give the background, and then you give what you want to achieve, your plan. It's very important. And then of course the whole body of the proposal itself, what would be and this, what, who, when, how you're going to do it. You can also bring this in the body of the proposal. And of course, which is very important, is the conclusion. The conclusion is a summary that explain how you are going to implement your project, how you're going to do your project. And it's very important that in your conclusion you can also bring in your budget. You can bring it as an annexure, and your budget is very important, because whoever is going to give you money, the donor, wants to know, for what you have written in the body of your proposal, how much do you think is the value of your proposal. And looking at that proposal, when you look at the amount of money, does it justify the content of your proposal? That's why it's very important that when you're going to write proposal, you have to know what you want to do, when you have to do it, what you have to do it, and so on. So that's with regard to the budgeting of your proposal. Then of course you can have some appendix annexed, and in this annex you normally put in the detail of the project, where you describe the project, what method you're going to use, the timetable. You can bring some photos. You can even attach your annual report, your audited financial statement. It all depends on what the donor is expecting. So this is something you can also look at. And then of course your referencing, and now talking about referencing, I also need the references for your assignments. So you have to see where did you get the source. If you give statistics in your proposal, you have to say, where did you get the statistic? When was those statistics published? Are they formal statistics? Can they be trusted? Or did you just imagine or use your own imagination? So it's very important that in your proposal you have to bring out those aspects when it comes to the referencing. So that's with regard to assignment number 3. I think I've already explained to you what I need. I need you to explain what the HIV funding in Namibia, landscape. You can use comparative statistic. You can come up with a dummy proposal writing. You have to say, how does if funding have an impact on the HIV intervention in Namibia. So you can come with those practical example just to explain everything. So as I say, there is so many things that you can look at. Now there is a very important document that you can also use for Namibia, which is then also launched by the Ministry of Health and Social Services. So this is where the AIDS response, and this is like a progress report that Namibia have submitted 2015. So where you can look, so you can use this document as a source, and it all explain about the AIDS funding situation in Namibia, the list of donors, who are the donors in Namibia, what did they fund when it comes to HIV fund, and you can use those comparative analysis when it comes to the AIDS funding, and you have to give those factual reference and make reference to this document, for example, when it comes to statistics and so on. So that's with regard to the assignment. Now, coming to the fourth assignment, we are going to talk about gender-based violence. It's quite a very sensitive subject in Namibia currently. Now, in your assignment, what I expect from you is you have to give the current situation of gender-based violence. You first define what is gender-based violence, what are the different forms of gender-based violence, and what forms of gender-based violence is relevant in Namibia, or it's always occurring. For an example, we've got intimate partner violence, where intimate partners are killing their own intimate partners. So those are some. Then in your assignment, you have to name the specific gender-based violence that are relevant for Namibia or that are always occurring. Then number two, you're going to explain why does it occur or why does it happen. Number three is then you must look at the interventions by government organization, all the intervention that has been made from the past. Was it successful or was it a failure? And if it was a success, why? If it is a failure, then you must give practical example why it is a failure. And number four, then you have to give some recommendation. What do you recommend? What the Namibian government or what an organization needs to follow suit to address the gender-based violence. And of course, you have to justify your answer with practical examples, which are very important in Namibia. I got an excerpt from the New Era newspaper, current newspaper, our local newspaper in Namibia, dated November the 28th, 2016, and I just took the highlights of the newspaper. It was front page, and it says over 2,000 gender-based violence cases are reported. 2,000 only last year. And this was in November. So now the question people are asking is, what do you do with unreported cases, cases that are not being reported? So at this stage, we don't know how many cases. It might be more than 2,000 cases of gender-based violence we have in Namibia. Now, in your assignment, you can bring out the aspect of non-reported or unreported cases of gender-based violence in Namibia. And then in your assignment, you have to discuss how can we encourage those that are being violated or experience gender-based violence, how we can address this issue as much as possible. So that's the end of my presentation. I hope that this presentation will help you, and I will encourage you to make reference to your study guide, to your manual, and then also to this presentation, and I wish you all the best for your assignments. Thank you.